and a warm welcome to the fourth focus session of an online conference series on EU media policy entitled Pluralism and Responsibility, Media in a Digital Society. This conference series was organized by the German EU Council Presidency with generous support by the European Commission. And the goal of the series is to foster media freedom and diversity across Europe. My name is Marianna Evenstein. I'm a news anchor with Germany's international broadcaster, DW, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's discussion on regulation and responsibility of video sharing platforms, or as they're known, VSPs, with a particular focus on youth protection and advertising. This focus session is being co-hosted by Germany's Federal Commissioner for Culture and the Media and the European Audiovisual Observatory, or EAO, which is part of the European Council in Strasbourg, France. Media freedom in the European Union is a fundamental right that applies to all EU member states and their citizens. It's enshrined in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights as well as by the European Convention on Human Rights, which is why we're especially pleased today to be cooperating with the EAO, which is dedicated to providing a Europe-wide overview of the audiovisual industry in 41 countries. As we've mentioned before, these are the very first conferences to be held online during an EU Council presidency. The original plan was to hold a 3-day conference in the German city of Bonn, but as we all know, the coronavirus pandemic forced those plans to be revised, and it was decided to move the event online. And as unfortunate as it is that we are unable to meet everyone face to face, there are a number of advantages to holding this event digitally. For example, instead of just having one 3-day event, we are able to bring you 7 online events on 7 different days, and we're also quite happy to see that there are far more people participating in this digital format than we would have been able to accommodate in person in Bonn. So thank you to everyone who's been participating virtually with these conferences. Now, unlike previous focus sessions, which were moderated from this little studio here in Berlin, for today's focus session, we will be connecting directly with Strasbourg, France, and the European Audiovisual Observatory, where standing by for us to lead the discussion is Maja Cappello. She's head of the Department for Legal Information. Hello to you, Maja. Hello to Strasbourg, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marianna. I hope I am online now. Yes, I am. I see myself here in Strasbourg, the premises of the Council of Europe, and I will have the pleasure of guiding the discussion today. But before we start, I would like to give the floor to the Executive Director of the European Audiovisual Observatory, Susanna Nikolchev, for a few welcoming words. So, Susanna, the floor is yours.
Good morning and welcome to the focus session organized by the European Audiovisual Observatory. For us, it is an honor and a pleasure to support the EU Council Presidency of Germany. If you follow regularly European events on audiovisual issues, you will know that the observatory often contributes factual and unbiased background. This is because the 41 countries and the European Union, which are members of the observatory, expect us to provide strategic information to the audiovisual industry and more precisely to its policy and decision makers. This expectation builds on the simple but compelling logic that knowledge translates into strengths. Strengths that we all wish the audiovisual sector to have, especially in these difficult times. Regarding today's topic, regulation and responsibility of video sharing platform, its strategic relevance predates COVID-19. For example, in 2018, when France held the observatory presidency, we dealt with it in a major conference. Now, the corona pandemic has, however, deepened our perception of the importance of video sharing platforms and possibly intensified the discussion about their role in the audiovisual value chain. The corona pandemic has also delayed the transposition of the AVMS directive, which then determines, unfortunately, what information we can offer for this focus session. We are obviously not able to discuss yet, I should say, the new national rules that will address regulation and responsibility of video sharing platforms. So where do we put the focus? My colleague, Maja Cappello, has scrutinized the situation and will tell you what the plan is. Over to you.
Thank you for this introduction, Susanne. I will just add that this focus session aims to dig into the regulatory framework applicable to video sharing platforms from the point of view of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. As I guess all our viewers know, this was revised in 2018, and deadline for national implementation actually expired Saturday, 19th of September, last week. So it's a process that, of course, is going also to influence a bit the discussion today. Just to recall the most important changes that have been introduced by the directive, it is well known that for the first time VSPs are in the scope of the directive, and this is a big change because before then the only applicable framework was the e-commerce directive, which is a bit old now, 20 years, more than 20 years, it dates from 2000. So it's quite new, the regulatory setting that we have now with Article 28B. In a nutshell, it obliges member states to ensure that video sharing platforms adopt measures in order to protect children from harmful content, to protect the general public from illegal content and content that incites to violence or hatred, and last but not least, respect certain obligations around commercial communications. Now, talking about e-commerce directive, it's also well known that there is another little elephant in the room, which is not on the table yet, but it's high on the political agenda, which goes under the name of the Digital Services Act. I'm sure we will hear also about this. This envisages an upgrade, basically, of EU liability and safety rules on digital platforms in order to complete the digital single market. What will happen during today's focus session is the following. We will start with a presentation to set the scene on what is happening in the member states. We will then have a guided discussion with distinguished panelists, which represents the European Commission, the regulators, 3 video sharing platforms, Facebook, Google, YouTube, and TikTok, and also academics from another research that is going on in this domain. We will open a chat box as well in order to welcome questions from the audience. You can already start type them in. Please, and this is important, provide also your name and your affiliation so that it's also easier to know the context of the questions. Should you like to tweet, the hashtag is EU2020EU. Now, in order to keep the session focused, let me also say that we have decided to exclude from the scope of the discussion the copyright package. This would deserve another conference, which we'll be happy to do, but it's not on the table today. So we will, as I mentioned in the very beginning, concentrate on the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. Why has the observatory in particular been chosen for this exercise? Because we are doing a mapping report. We have been requested by the European Commission to do so. And the purpose of this mapping is to map the legal framework in the European member states plus the UK in order to see how is the state of the art of the implementation and the practices that are being adopted by the video sharing platforms in the domains of protection of minors and protection of the general public when it comes to hate speech and violence. We have hired a general expert for this, Jean-François Furnemont. He will be our keynote speaker today, and in order to let him prepare and turn the microphone on, I will just say that he's founder and CEO of Wagner Hatfield, a research and consulting company where he has developed lots of expertise in this field, also thanks to his long-standing experience in the world of the media regulators. So, Jean-François, the floor is yours for introducing the topic of today's focus session.
Thank you, Maja, and hello, everyone. I hope the sound is good now and that everybody hears me. Otherwise, give me a sign. And thanks, Maja, for indeed already having set in the scene and recall that what we're talking about today is what was before 2018 a gray area between the AVMS directive and the e-commerce directive. This gray area of video sharing platform dealing with audiovisual content, which is sometimes not under the editorial responsibility of the media service providers like our TV program and video on demand. So let me just remind legally what we're talking about. So Article 1 of the AVMS directive says that a video sharing platform service is a service where the principal purpose of the service or an essential section thereof or an essential functionality of the service devoted to providing programs, user-generated video, or both to the general public, for which the video sharing platform provider does not have editorial responsibility in order to inform, entertain, or educate. So as you mentioned, Maja, there are mainly three types of requirements that video sharing platform will have to fulfill in terms of protection of minors, in terms of commercial communications, and in terms of protecting the public from illegal content or content that incites to violence or hatred. So to get a proper understanding of this legal framework and the current practices already in place in the member states, we are currently working on a mapping report, which will cover EU and the UK. Methodology of this mapping is very similar to the one that has been used for previous mapping that are elaborated by the observatory and lies on a standardized questionnaire, which is filled by 28 national independent correspondents, usually lawyers or researchers. And then these questionnaires are processed by an international expert, in this case me, who on that basis produces 28 national fact sheets as well as a comparative analysis of the legal situation in all the member states. The objective of those fact sheets is to map the legal framework and the current practices relating to video sharing platform. And this also includes the most significant self and co-regulatory initiatives and national experiences in enforcing the existing rule. The fact sheets will also identify the most significant initiatives taken and issues faced by stakeholders to address their new obligation. The information will also include legal definitions of video sharing platforms and of other relevant terms introduced by the AVMSD, such as user-generated content. It will identify the categories of obligations imposed on VSP and the national instruments and the mechanism necessary for the transposition of VSP-related provisions of the AVMS directive. So as of today, the majority of questionnaires have been filled and are currently being analyzed. And in this respect, I have to emphasize that information we gathered so far will have to be updated at a later stage of the preparation of this mapping report, as the transposition process is still taking place in the vast majority of countries. We are actually currently dealing mainly with drafts. So from the information that we gathered so far, what can we say? Well, the first thing is that, as you said, Maja, the deadline of September 2020 has not been met by the vast majority of member states, with only two member states, Hungary and Denmark, finishing the process by the adoption of the relevant legislation. In other member states, we have drafts that are being prepared or that are under parliamentary procedures, and in some cases there is not much news and no draft still available, like in Spain and if I'm not mistaken, in Slovakia. In some cases as well, such as in Italy, we have sub-legislative acts that have been adopted by the regulatory authority, transposing parts of the AVML directive, but still waiting for a draft to be adopted containing all the provisions transposing the AVMS directive. Today's discussion does not allow for going much into detail of the transposition process, and I will just try to give you a short overview and provide you with preliminary findings. In what appears currently is that mainly transposition is underway by fully transposing the wording and the obligations stemming from the AVMS directive, sometimes almost as a copy-paste and without introducing strict measures. In other countries, like Finland, for example, the legislature thought that it was better to opt for giving the VSP providers discretion over the measures to be taken, as it was considered that too detailed definition of the measures to be adopted in a way that meets the requirement of the directive would probably lead to potential restrictions on freedom of expression than the proposed more open regulatory approach. It should also be noted that in some cases there are several legislations that have to be taken into account in terms of transposition of the obligations stemming from the AVMSD. For example, in Italy, where in addition to the draft transposition law, there is also amendment to be taken to the criminal code, the law against cyberbullying, electronic communication service code, and code on civil procedures. It should also be noted that a lot of hands-on regulatory mechanisms are foreseen by sub-legislative acts, which will be further adopted by regulators, which is currently not the case, of course. And this is probably where, so this will probably for that have to wait for next year, and this is probably where we would see more concrete and practical regulatory response to the basic tier of obligations stemming from the AVMSD. So as it is, of course, and we all know why, as interest for all European, I have chosen to include in my presentation today some features coming out from Ireland, a member state which will have jurisdiction over the main VSPs in Europe. So the proposed legislation is currently visible in terms of the general scheme of the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill, which will amend the current Broadcasting Act and which provides for all the definitions of terms stemming from the AVMS directive. When it comes to issues such as incitement to hatred, protection of minors, the emphasis is put by the scheme on the amendments to the relevant sub-legislative acts that will have to be enacted by the regulatory authority. But it also provides some guidance in relation to, for example, incitement to hatred, and provide for descriptions of material that are considered to be harmful online content. But does not propose clear definitions. It says, for example, that harmful online content is materials which are considered criminal offense, material which is likely to have effect intimidating, threatening, humiliating, or persecuting a person to which it pertains, material which is likely to encourage or promote eating disorders, etc. But it does not include defamatory statements, material that violate data protection or privacy privacy law, material that violates consumer protection law, and material that violates copyright. In relation to some of the issues regarding protection of minors, the proposed Irish legislation provides that age inappropriate online content means material which may be unsuitable for exposure to minors and that they should normally see or hear it, and which may impair their development, as well as material containing or comprising gross or gratuitous violence, material containing or comprising cruelty, including mutilation and torture towards human or animal, and material containing or comprising pornography. As I said, the regulatory mechanisms stemming from secondary legislation are mainly the Code of Program Standards and the Children Commercial Communication Codes, which further detail the regulatory obligation and which will be amended in the future and which will be of core interest in relation to the creation of ESPs. Finally, the general scheme proposed to replace the existing regulatory authority, the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland, by a new so-called Media Commission, whose power will include regulation of VSP. It's worth noticing that the Media Commission will have the capacity to enter in voluntary agreement with any relevant online service, including those which will not be established in Ireland. This voluntary agreement will specify the extent to which a relevant online service agrees to comply with any online safety code or online safety guidance material, which will be issued by the future Media Commission in accordance with the reporting requirement of the VSP. I can also give you a few words about Denmark, where the transposition has been completed. The law was adopted with the basic, almost copy-paste transposition of the AVMSD, while we are now waiting for 12 executive orders, so sub-legislative acts, the purpose of which will be to implement the rules in detail. And some of them are currently ongoing consultation processes. For example, an executive order on video sharing platform services entered into force on the 1st of August. And so there's not much to say about the practice in that case, but what we can mention is that just a few months prior to the adoption of this order on video sharing platform, there has been a few cases which might in the future be dealt with by the new legislation, like the so-called umbrella case, which involve the circulation of videos of youngsters having sex, and since one of them was under 18 years old, actually 15 years old at the time of recording, then this was dealt by the Danish criminal code that deals with child pornography. And the police became aware of that material because it was distributed on Facebook and also on Messenger. Another case that was...
I need to ask you to move towards the closing.
Okay. I can also mention that in many cases the cooperation is visible and foreseen in many cases, so that probably the regulatory authority which will be in charge will have to cooperate with several other institutions, like, for example, the Ombudsman Office for personal data issues, but also with the relevant ministries, in some countries with the competition authorities, in some countries with consumer authorities, market surveillance authorities, product safety authorities, And an example of this cooperation between the various public bodies involved can, for example, be found in Finland. And this will be the last example I wanted to share.
Thank you very much to Jean-François Furnemont for this very informative presentation. Indeed, there is much still to come. And now to set the tone further for our panel discussion, we have the privilege of having with us Ania Helseth. Ania is head of the Audiovisual and Media Policy Unit at the European Commission and is Mrs. AVMSD, I would say. She has been working in this field since 2003, and is there one person who knows the directive in and out? That's Ania Helseth. But we'll not talk only about that. I suspect that Ania wants also to look a little bit broader, and I am also very curious about what is in the Commission's plans now that we hear both about democracy plans, Digital Services Act, revisions ongoing, AVMSD is there. So, Ania, what is the temperature from the point of view of the European Commission? The floor is yours.
Thank you and good morning to everybody. It's a true pleasure for me to be here, and I wanted to thank first of all, the German presidency for organizing this incredible series of media policy events. Probably you're right, it's even better to have 7 different events. Of course, nothing will replace the personal contact, but I think we have done together an excellent job with that. And of course, a big thank you to the observatory for organizing this session that indeed is probably the closest to, let's say, our current business. Maja, you have asked about the temperature. The temperature is, of course, it's getting very, very cold in Brussels, but within the Commission it's very hot on all the issues around online safety and responsibility of platforms, as you will know very well. But before I tell you a few words about, let's say, the new things that you have mentioned, Maja, maybe very briefly a bit to set the scene for the discussion, to which I'm really looking forward to with some of the regulatees, but also regulators and academics. Maybe just a few words about what will be expected already now, of course, provided that member states accelerate their work on the national transposition that Jean-François described to the extent possible for now. What actually will be required from platforms? I think both Maja and Jean-François, that certainly can be on the podium with me as AVMSD connoisseurs, already described the areas. I will not come back to those. We all know what we are supposed to talk about. We talk about, of course, protecting viewers from incitement to hatred, illegal content, protecting minors from harmful content, and trying to protect also viewers as consumers when they are looking at commercial content, at commercial communications online. So this is what we are going to trying to achieve, but the big question, of course, and this is probably something that I would very much like to hear today, is how. The directive, of course, gives indication to how, so what is foreseen, and on this I wanted to say a few words, is, of course, first of all, that what we expect in terms of viewers' protection will be reflected in terms and conditions of the platforms. Then, practically speaking, what the directive foresees is that there has to be a possibility for the users to flag and report content, and then also to get feedback on, on the kind of follow-up that has been given to this mechanism. As regards protection of minors, the directive speaks of 3 distinctive instruments: age verification, content rating, and parental controls. So I think that I would be very curious to hear from especially the potential regulatees on the panels how they are looking at this challenging area, of course, because it's one thing to protect minors on classical media services, but a completely different matter online. And then thirdly, an area that is linked to commercial communication. This is mostly about qualitative standards, because this is what the legislators found appropriate. So trying to make sure that commercial communications do not discriminate, that do not advertise products that are not possible to be advertised within the EU, and so on. And these sort of basic standards requirements will, of course, now again need to be reflected in the terms and conditions of platforms, respected by platforms for the type of advertising that they directly control, and for the type of advertising that is outside of their control. The main objective of the directive is transparency, to make sure that the uploaders, that the users can declare that there is commercial content and what they what they will be uploading, and then for the platforms to make sure that users are informed about it in some form of labeling. So this is, in a nutshell, very briefly, what the directive foresees, of course, in a very general manner. And of course, what we would like to know, and what our discussions now with the member states and with the regulatees will be concentrating and focusing on, will be to make sure that this works in practice. And for all of this to work in practice, one important aspect will be also what was also hinted at, the fact that the directive is based on the principle of country of origin. We have, we are strongly attached to that principle. We think that it, made the development of audiovisual markets as we have them today in Europe, and we would like to continue that even more so for online services. But of course, to make it all work, we need to have some sort of very efficient cooperation between the responsible regulator and all the other regulators that, of course, will be getting user complaints. Because what the directive also foresees is a three-step user complaint mechanism, one for the platform to set up as an internal complaint mechanism, but then, of course, for the member states, obliges member states to put in place out-of-court redress mechanisms, which often, not everywhere probably, but often will be given, or this role of this alternative dispute resolution system will often be given to the media regulators. So in order to make sure that this all works, and also to make sure that the users, can have access to, let's say, the basic recourse in their language of origin, there will have to be some well-functioning cooperation mechanism between the regulators. I'm very curious to what both the regulatees, but also, of course, Lubos, will say about this. Maybe, since Maja asked me as my last word, a short, let's say, future outlook. So this is what we have already on the table, and we are really determined to make sure it works. So we are working with the member states. Jean-François already mentioned only 2 member states have already transposed the directive. There are other 2 that have partially transposed, and many others that are in the course of transposing. My commissioner has written to the member states very recently, just before the transposition deadline of the 19th of September, to ask for more information. So we are really following this very closely. We are really determined to make sure that these rules already work in practice. Because what we are certainly not prepared for is to wait for the next big thing to come. Because you will all know, and Maja already hinted to that, there will be a discussion about possible new additional obligations as regards online platforms within the Digital Services Act. You know that part of this discussion certainly will be about something which we haven't touched upon in the directive, and which concerns removals of content. So the possible harmonization of the notice and action procedures. There might be also some additional obligations in terms of responsibilities for platforms that of course will be subject to long legislative discussions. So this is indeed in the pipeline, but I think the message that my commissioner tries to send to the market is very much, let's try to make sure that what we already have works in practice, because then of course we will have much less of a problem in the follow-up discussions in this big review or overhaul of all the rules that we have for online services in Europe under the e-commerce directive. So I think that this is something that I wanted to stress. We will also look, of course, at the role of media and the issue of disinformation and the situation in terms of media freedom in Europe within this European Democracy Action Plan. So this is also extremely important. And of course, again, the regulators here with their vast experience of dealing with internal and external plurality issues, of course, will be very important for us. But I think the message for us today, and what I think this debate can really contribute, is how we can make sure now in 2020, and I know that many of the people will have a lot of interesting things to say on this, that indeed users are better protected in the online environment in Europe, and that it all happens in a way that we see as a European way, where there is a sufficient level of public oversight. So thank you. I think with that, I will pass over to Maja to moderate the discussion, and I will be happy to come back to comment and introduce a few further issues as we go along. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this broad picture. The temperature is high, I would say. Everything sounds very hot on the agenda, and you rightfully mentioned regulators. Indeed, their role has expanded enormously since the time where they dealt only with broadcasting, then came VODs, now we have video sharing platforms. Workload increases, not necessarily the size of the regulators. I have a long past as working for a regulator myself, so I know that size in this case absolutely matters. And since Ireland was mentioned, indeed that is a small regulator, and now the question is, will they have to do everything themselves, or can they count on the help of their colleagues from other regulators? We are lucky today, we have Lubos Kuklic with us. He is not only chief executive at the Slovak media regulator, but he's also member of ERGA, the platform of regulators in the media field in Europe. He also was the chairperson, so he really knows this issue very, very closely. So my question comes now a bit spontaneous. How do you see, Lubos, so that you can prepare a microphone, the role of the regulators in the months and years to come? Will you have the means to enforce these rules? Is it only up to Ireland? Will you help them? And how is this cooperation also going to work? So, Lubos, I hand over to you for your 4 minutes of statement.
Thank you, Maja. And thank you to the organizers for having me here today. It's a pleasure. Of course, we will help Ireland. We understand the problems that are arising from the responsibilities that they are given because of the country of origin principle, of course. And this is why ERGA, for example, is intensely working on the mechanisms that we can work together very efficiently, because the country of origin principle means that if there is no intense coordination between regulators, there might be the benefits from the directive may not emerge in all of the member states. So we are really keen on doing everything in our powers to make this happen. And it also means that we need to try, I think, to implement the directive in a harmonized way. Now, the thing is that the directive is really laying foundation for many new things in this environment. I think structurally it brings really a new kind of approach to the media regulation. In the old world, you had media and regulators, and there was this dichotomy where the media had all the editorial control and all the editorial responsibility, and then for the freedom of media was theirs, and there was regulator on the other side who was enforcing the legislation and who was taking care of the public interest. And now you have an active user who is coming into that equation. And I think the good thing within the directive is that it's recognizing the rights of the users. Now, the most important thing, I think, is that also the legislation in the member states is recognizing this. That this triangle structure will be enforced, that the rights of the user are enshrined in the legislation. And I've seen, for example, UK's draft of law that is doing this in a really excellent way. Now, I have seen drafts of legislation that would not recognize the rights of the user at all. And I think the active user, the one who is uploading the content, also needs to have its rights recognized. And for us as regulators is to understand this structure also. You know, the directive is pushing toward the co-regulatory structure. Now, it's something, you know, we have to recognize what that means within the video sharing platforms regulation, because a part of the regulation already lies with the VSPs because of what the directive legislates. Now, the question is, would that mean that, for example, for the exercise, the co-regulatory structure is that you will only take a backseat as a regulator and just to follow the systemic implementation of the measurement? Or, for example, there will be more detailed rules. Now, would you hand that over to VSPs, or will these codes of more detailed rules will be made by the regulators themselves? These are questions that need to be answered in every jurisdiction. Now, in Ireland, we've already seen that the proposal is saying that the codes will be drafted by the regulator. And what is very interesting in this field is that other member states are also thinking about, okay, we have the VSP regulation, which is a new kind of regulation. Now, will we expand this also to other services? And Ireland, the proposal in Ireland is doing that, is really giving the powers to regulator to also encompass in its regulation other services. Of course, there are some backstops, there need to be research around that, there needs to be evidence that such services needs to be regulated. But the important thing, again, is that if we go without any harmonized way, if we won't coordinate ourselves intensely, there may be, you know, different rules and different rights for users and platforms in different countries. And I don't think this is something desirable. So again, as you said, the cooperation needs to be very intense, and we in ERGA are very keen on making that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Lubos. That was indeed a very enlightening approach towards the problem. There are many players, and it's a constellation system that has to be put in place. Systemic approach, more detailed ones. It's going to be extremely interesting. I'm sure you will not get bored in the time that comes. But now we have mentioned these platforms many times. It's time to introduce them. We have three distinguished speakers with us today. We have Ania Helseth, who is Public Policy Manager at Facebook. We have Marco Pancini, he is Government Affairs and Public Policy Director for Europe in YouTube, and Alexandra Evans, she is Head of Child Safety Public Policy in Europe for TikTok. And I would like to ask the same questions to all three of them, since they represent three very different kinds of platforms with different audiences, target groups, different uses, different problems. But I would say that what we have been talking about so far has something in common. They have already put in place measures. They have not been sitting there waiting for the member states to do their homework, but they have been active. So I would like to ask them what they are most proud of what they have achieved, and maybe also what they are less proud of, so that maybe there is still some room for improvement. Let's maybe start from Facebook. That corresponds more to my age group. So I would like to ask Ania Helseth to tell us a bit what kind of issues you're experiencing in Facebook with regard to content regulation, and what kind of measures you are putting in place in order to achieve the goals that are set by Article 28B of the AVMS directive. Ania, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maja. Thank you all to German Presidency as well for having us here today. So indeed, this is a very hot topic for us internally, and as some already alluded, these are issues that we will be grappling with going forward as the implementation progresses. Before maybe we get to the implementation discussion itself, just Just a very quick recap on the mission, mission of Facebook, just because the platforms that will address the audience today are slightly different, or actually quite different. So our focus is to give people tools and possibilities to basically bring them closer together with their friends and family. These interactions among our users can include a variety of tools, videos being one of them. Therefore, what we consider for today's purposes video sharing platform is just one of the elements of our quite inclusive multimedia platform. We generally speaking already for years called for some kind of regulatory standards as to how private companies such as ours should deal with some issues that arise on internet every day, especially around issues of harmful content, so content that is harmful to our users. However, there's no legal basis per se to just remove it under the e-commerce directive notice and action. We do think that this is important, that this is addressed, and therefore the approach that AVMS is taking, the principles that AVMS is putting forward are really close to the way we were thinking of those things internally. So we very much welcome this approach towards obligations of VSPs in which we kind of fall in this category. So just in terms of procedural parts, we do expect that some parts of the service will fall into it. We are still waiting, of course, for the Irish transposition that will be, of course, guided as well by the Commission's guidance on essential functionality. All this we already discussed a number of times. So, of course, Facebook is not just sitting and waiting for the regulatory framework to come up, but we already for years kind of grapple with those issues and try to put measures in place to address it in the same way, balancing issues such as freedom of expression, freedom of our users to kind of put out their content that not necessarily is always easy to digest, so to say. But maybe starting from what governs our policy. So our community standards is where our kind of rules of the game, if you want to be on Facebook, are enshrined. There's quite a few elements that probably come very close together to the approach that AVMS also puts forward. We have very strict rules around protection of minors. We have very strict rules around putting forward content that it's either, inciting to violence, inciting to hate. All this is basically not welcome on the platform, and we have a variety of product tools, but also people working with us to make sure that we basically create an environment where people indeed come and can share content with friends and family, rather than and not enjoy something that's disturbing to them. So 35,000 people right now that deal with those issues and try to basically protect our users and make sure that we are in the safe environment. Basically,
1 little minute more.
Basically around specifically minors. We of course have a minimum age for joining the service. It's 13. In some countries it varies because of the local laws, but generally what we see between 13 and 18, are minors on our platform, and they are subject to very specific rules. That includes what kind of products they will be advertised to. That includes services they will be allowed to see. For example, minors are not allowed to use dating services. They will not be allowed to see some products on Watch, which is a service where we can show some of the professional content and variety of others. So perhaps we can dig into it a bit more during the discussion. But just to put those pointers on your radar, so to say. I don't have more time.
Thank you for this, Ania. That was indeed a lot to be proud of. I didn't hear anything you were not proud of, but you will maybe come back to that later. So we heard Ania Helseth. She's public policy manager at at Facebook for EU Affairs, but we will now move over to another video sharing platform. And here, indeed, the videos play a very relevant role, that is YouTube. And we have here with us Marco Pancini, Government Affairs and Public Policy Director for Europe. And I would like to ask Marco as well, so you can turn your mic on. What kind of measures are you putting in place? And in 4 minutes, proud, not proud. Floor is yours, Marco.
Thank you, Maja. Thank you also to the German Presidency to have us here today and interact with such a qualified and important panel of speakers. So let me first make a step back and comment quickly on what Anna and Lubos said. We really welcome the leadership of the Commission and of the regulators in going through this important phase of implementation of the VMSD. We really believe that the work that was done by the Commission with this piece of legislation is remarkable. I think going beyond even VMSD, the infrastructure built by the VMSD could be also like a point of reference for the forthcoming legislation on the tech sector, like the DSA, in terms of defining well the scope, both in terms of what are the companies that should be under the scope of these new rules, what kind of obligation, making sure that there is a graduated approach to the different obligations in relation to the role that the actors are playing in the ecosystem. On the regulator side, I really welcome ERGA's role in trying to coordinate with the Irish regulators in our case, but with any other regulator, I would say, in order to really make sure that we can really take the most out of the principle of the country of origin, which is key for the digital sector. That said, let me get straight into your question, Maja. I think that we took this exercise of complying with the VMSD rule in a very thoughtful way. I think for once we got ears from our headquarters, and we really look into product solutions and policy updates to meet the expectations of the new VMSD. When we talk about the product solutions, of course, we were looking at the date of the 19th of September to come with some of the new initiatives to meet the obligation of the VMSD, which, it's in a certain sense give you also the perspective sometimes of a company like YouTube, which is a video sharing platform with billions of users across the world. So if we want to meet the deadline of the 19th of September, we had to start working on this project 2 years ago, more or less, in some of the cases 1 year ago. And that's why, for example, yesterday, and I'm very proud of this new product, we launched a new tool. We announced that we are going to verify users if they are trying to watch content that we believe is only for a mature audience. That's not trivial, because it requires from us to use the best of our machine learning on two sides. One side, to identify clearly on top of what the creators already saying to us if content is for a mature audience only. Second is really to create the right level of experience for users that has to go through this verification. So we are going to use again the best of our tools to identify whenever we have elements, if the user, in relation also to the age that as gave to us during the registration form, is an adult. If we have any doubt that the user is not an adult, or if we have evidence from the age, from the age that the user put in the registration form that is not an adult, then we're going to ask the user to go through a very solid identification, age identification, verification process, including the request of ID card and or credit card in case of need. This specific piece is going to be for Europe and for the UK, of course, only at the moment, because we again want to make it very clear that this is in compliance with the VMSD. But I really want to stress that this is something we are proud of. We really made extra step to meet expectation and obligation, building new products ad hoc. What we are not proud of, I want to also be transparent with you that the job in keeping hate speech out of our platform is very complex and is not a job done. We made a huge progress updating our policies to meet the threshold of the VMSD, but also the expectation of keeping hate speech out of our platform. We use the best of our technology to identify violation in videos. Next step for us is really make sure that we have the same level and quality of enforcement of our policies also for the messaging part of our page, which is not core to the video section, which was our main focus, but now is the next target for us.
Thank you for this, Marco. And indeed, lots of work has been done, and great timing to launch your new product for the conference. So, and also thanks for flagging up some ways for progress. That's always good to know that there is more that can be done. We have talked about minors, but indeed the platform that is identified in an excellent way as being the most liked by teens is maybe TikTok. TikTok is also, allow me the word, is more the kid in the room, more recent compared to the more the long-standing platforms that we have here today. But we are lucky, and I'm very happy that we have Alexandra Evans with us. She is head of Child Safety Public Policy Europe, an expert when it comes to all issues concerning protection of minors. And since the target group of TikTok is really quite low in age, I would really be interested in hearing what kind of measures TikTok is putting in place, the usual 4 minutes, what you're proud of, what you're not proud of. And let me also alert the audience on the fact that the chat box is open, and we have already received a few questions. We're taking note of them, so please feel free to write. Our moderator, Alison Hindef, is forwarding to me. So, Alexandra, the floor is yours. Turn your mic on.
Thank you, Maja. I'm really grateful for the invitation to join the panel today. As you say, we are the new kid on the block, so it's lovely to be here. And also, of course, thank you to the German presidency. I'm conscious that TikTok is quite new, so I'm just going to very quickly give you an overview. I'm conscious again of my 4-minute time limit, and I promise to try and stick to it. So we are a video sharing platform, and people come to our platform to create and to share and to watch videos. We're growing at pace. In the first 6 months of this year, we had over 1 billion videos uploaded to our platform. The videos are typically 15 seconds long, but they can be up to a minute, and everyone is using their seconds differently. So some are using it to tell a joke, some are debuting songs, some are sharing recipes, some are advocating for change, and some are talking about sports or speaking their truth. And as everyone knows, of course, people come to TikTok to dance. The vast majority of our users are not just watching content, they're also getting stuck in and creating their own content, which is something that we're all really, really proud of. So it's a space where people come to share their creativity and to express themselves. And to do this, our community has to feel safe. And that's really important for us. Safety isn't a bolt-on, it's a cornerstone. And our safety strategy reflects that. As I said, we're only 2 years old, but already we have 10,000 moderators across the globe, and thousands of those are based here in the European Union. We've established 3 safety hubs, one in Singapore, one in San Francisco, and one in Dublin. And these hubs are responsible for developing and driving our global safety strategy. And they're led by industry veterans who not only lead the hubs, but also play a really critical role as part of our company's leadership team. So, as Maja said, child safety is my passion and my expertise. So I'm going to probably lean on that throughout this conversation. But in to illustrate our safety strategy, I think it's useful to see how we apply that in the child safety sphere. So I'm part of a global, cross-functional, dedicated team of safety specialists who focus on child safety. And our brief is wide-ranging. It encompasses things like our community guidelines, our moderation strategy, our user reporting mechanisms, our safety information, and family safety features like our family pairing. We also work to build safety into the design of our services, including restricting features that we believe just aren't appropriate for teenagers. An example of that is our direct messaging service, which is definitely built with safety in mind. There are some restrictions on that are applicable to all of our users. So, for example, you can't, on direct messaging, send an unsolicited message to another user. You both have to have mutually agreed to follow the other before that messaging service is open to you. Equally, we've taken the decision that it's just not appropriate to be able to send an attachment on our direct messaging service. So you can't send an image or a video via direct messaging on TikTok. But earlier this year, we took an additional step and decided that actually that feature was not something that we felt was appropriate for under 16s. So we've disabled that feature for all under 16s on our platform. And I should say that actually under 16s also aren't allowed to host live streams, and you have to be 18 to send or receive a virtual gift on TikTok. And all of this, I think, reflects our safety-first approach. But we are conscious that we have further to travel. And I like Maja's question to say that we cannot just talk about what we're proud of, but also where we think there's room for improvement. And from that, we speak a lot to children and we speak a lot to parents. And one thing that's come up from our conversations is that they like our family pairing feature. It's a mechanism that enables a parent to link their account to a child's account so that they can have a bit more visibility over how their teenager is using our account. It's been really well received and warmly received. So in terms of what we can do better, I think personally that we should be going further in terms of leaning into that feature and giving more visibility and oversight to parents in that space. Obviously, we hope that the family pairing feature will always lead to collaboration and communication, and we're really mindful of the fact that teenagers are entitled to a certain amount of autonomy and agency. It's a moment of huge development and change, and with it comes a need to explore one's sense of self, away from parents. But constantly we are thinking at TikTok about how we get that balance right between the need to make sure that a child is safe and that a parent is comfortable with the child using our service, and also ensuring that teenager's right to freedom of expression and autonomy is respected. That's just a brief overview. I'm conscious of time, so I'll leave it there. But again, just thank you so much for inviting us and including us in this really important discussion.
Thank you, Alexandra, for having also put the finger on the importance of involving parents in the picture. Indeed, they are the first responsible for making our children media literate. So that is indeed an important investment, and good to know that you are intentional to continue traveling, working on this topic. Now, we have heard from the 3 video sharing platforms that we have had here today, but I also mentioned another speaker at the beginning of my introduction, that is Sally Broughton-Mikova. She is a lecturer in communications policy and politics at the University of East Anglia, and she's currently working on a mapping report that will certainly be a very important complement research to the mapping that the observatory is doing, because she's actually looking at what the platforms are doing. So in the absence of implementation rules, this is absolutely very timely. So I would like to ask Sally, and she can start turning her mic on, if the examples that we have just heard from Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok are representative of what all video sharing platforms do. Is there a difference in size, in what kind of measures are being put in place? What are the first findings of your study, Sally? The floor is yours.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Maja. Thank you, Maja, and the Observatory and the German Presidency for hosting this. I think it's quite a timely discussion to be having. as Maja said, we were doing the kind of sister study to theirs, looking at what the platforms are actually doing, what measures are already being implemented that coincide with the expectations of Article 28B in the directive. And the first thing I should point out is that the platforms that we've heard from today are some of the bigger ones or biggest ones in terms of their size of usership, but also the kind of size of companies and the ability to invest in things that is behind them. And what our study did was look at a larger number of potential video sharing platforms. And I want to emphasize here that they are potential video sharing platforms, because in the end it is going to be up to Ljuboš and his fellow regulators to decide what actually is going to be a video sharing platform, whether one qualifies or not based on the criteria. So the platforms we looked at, we thought had potential to be considered. And in any case, even if they don't turn out to be video sharing platforms, they might be doing something already that is useful to look at. Now, the thing that we have found so far from our study, I think is important to look at the functionality. So we did two stages. We looked at the functionalities of the platform, what both users and advertisers can do on them, and then we also looked at the measures. And I'm going to talk first about the functionalities. Because these definitely have implications for the capacity of the platforms to implement the measures foreseen in the directive. So what we did was start out with some measures that kind of come out of the literature, stuff that had already been written, the discussions about the guidelines on essentiality that were going on at the time. And we also then had a team of graduate students trying out using the platforms, pretending to be advertisers, joining as users, etc., and organically identified functionalities in the platforms. Now, of course, platforms are changing things. Marco's announcement just now means that I now have to go back and change something in our report because now there's a functionality that there wasn't before. But I'm going to show you what our mapping of first the user functionality looks like. I'm going to share my screen here. So what you can see in the user functionality is that there was quite a difference between those platforms in the upper left quadrant, which includes the ones we've heard from today, where we had high amount of user control. And in terms of user content options, what we were looking at is the extent to which users have control and options on the upload, and also the extent to which they had control over what they were given as content. So this means things like whether or not they could age rate their content when they uploaded it or tag it with various characteristics, the extent to which they could declare any kind of promotional support, also whether or not there were filters or things such as parental controls. And then monetization options have to do with the ways in which users are able to make money, whether or not they get shares of advertising or can receive donations, etc. Now, these ones in the upper left quadrant have a lot of, I guess you could say, user autonomy, user control here. Whereas the ones down here in the bottom right quadrant are ones with lower functionality, and here you might see some that you haven't even heard of, but these are ones that could be considered video sharing platforms, but in general they have a low ability for users to classify their content or control the content they receive, and fewer options for monetization.
One little minute more.
Yeah, so the other thing that we looked at was advertising, and this I think has very significant implications in terms of the the extent to which platforms have the ability to implement the advertising qualitative rules. So if you look at, I will just share one more picture quickly. There is a big distinction between the advertisers that are operating in, I guess, a purchasing pathway, which we would call, which is proprietary. So these on the left-hand side, advertisers have a lot of control. They can use amazing tools to plan their campaigns and target. They can input their own user data or advertiser data in order to plan and target things. They're operating within, however, these integrated ecosystems that are governed by rather detailed terms and conditions. And the platforms themselves have relationships with these advertisers or control the tools that the advertisers are using. In the middle, you have platforms where there's also proprietary tools. So they're also in direct relationships with advertisers, and advertisers are operating under their terms and conditions. All the way on the right here, we have a category where they're generally using display advertising only. And this is being traded through the open web. And that means that they don't have much control whatsoever over what's getting served on their platforms. And this is where we might have to see that the regulatory moment needs to be at the intermediaries that are actually doing the ad serving to these platforms and not the platforms themselves. And that, of course, applies only for those that are not already captured by the advertising self-regulatory systems that are, addressing these things directly at the advertiser level. So I'll just show that these big distinctions appear. And so not all of the VSPs we're talking about are going to be the ones like the ones that we've heard from today. So in thinking about implementation, we have to consider the varying capacities and functionalities in the platforms.
Indeed, Sally, there was quite many features there, and the picture is indeed diversified. Now, we are a little bit in delay, so I will merge the two questions that I was supposed to do in two separate rounds now, which concern the issues of how the machinery is now going to work. We have seen there is a directive, there are national rules still to come, platforms are putting in place measures, they are also changing them very quickly, updating, and there are two big issues here. How is the cooperation working between platforms, regulators, commission, all this constellation, if we want to follow the Luboš vision of the systemic approach, let's say. And the second one concerns enforcement measures. We have seen there are measures, there are guidelines, there are rules, and certainly the platforms have also put in place, let me allow me to call them private enforcement measures. But the directive gives a direction towards the involvement of the institutions, and Anna Helseth mentioned that in the beginning, but I would like her to refresh our memory on this point. So if Anna can turn her mic on, I will be happy to give her the floor on these two issues of cooperation and enforcement altogether, so that we merge the two rounds and still have time for the chat box. Anna.
Thank you, Maja. No, indeed. So I think that this discussion has clearly shown that this will be the two big points as we go forward in trying to make sense out of this ecosystem that Luboš hinted at. I also wanted to thank Sally for the excellent study that we commissioned and we did right. I see it's still ongoing, of course, but it really looks promising, and it will also guide us, in trying to help regulators in making this all happen. And it also have very interesting insights into maybe things that are missing in the current framework, as your last point about advertising made clear. So now coming to the two topics, indeed, I think that our preoccupation now are twofold. On the one hand, how to make sure that the system that we have put in place in the directive works in practice. So how to make sure that indeed that there is some level of consistency. This was also implicit in what Sally was describing. We are lucky enough to have the free players that have taken things seriously, but of course we have to continue this conversation, we as the Commission, but of course in particular the regulators, how the system will work in practice, in particular also for the users that will be located all around Europe. So I think for us it's a big source of preoccupation also, so it's consistency first vis-a-vis the different players, but it's also how to address, let's say, the effectiveness vis-a-vis all users in Europe, taking into account the proximity issue. So the fact that, that you might need to have the possibility to complain in your own language to your own regulator, and then this regulator will need to deal with the matter with the responsible regulator. So I'm curious to hear your views on this as a first point. And as a second point, as I described briefly in the beginning, we have these 3 stages of, let's say, user redress. So the systems that have to be put in place within the platforms that already largely exist, as I assume on the services of the colleagues represented in this panel. But then there is this important element of public oversight. So I think this is the objective, we very much appreciate also all the initiatives that platforms were doing to put in place, their own systems also of redress and appeal. But I think for us it would be extremely important that there is a public oversight. This is what the directive means when it speaks about the out-of-court redress mechanisms, the alternative dispute resolution mechanism. So here again, I would like to hear both from everybody. I mean, who do you think should be this instance, and how it should interact then with the, let's say, internal systems that platforms have been already putting in place. Of course, I'm not talking about the judicial review that will always stay there, as the last resort. So I'm more curious about the practical resort for users in terms of redress.
Thanks for this insight, Anna. I will now bring it forward to our platforms we have here today. I will revert in order this time, so I'll maybe start with Alexandra. So 1 minute, 1 minute and a half max to touch upon cooperation and enforcement. What is your strategy? Is there some forum shopping? Is there, I don't know, a strategy for all Europe? Do you go country by country? How do you interact with the other players of this constellation? Alexandra.
Thank you. So you're asking me about cooperation and collaboration, and I would say that those are absolutely...
And enforcement. We merged the two.
And enforcement. Sorry. Yes, I will do that too. So I used to work as a regulator, and then I worked as an NGO, and now I'm working as a tech company. So I've been tackling the same problem, but from different angles for quite a few years now. And the things that I've learned from that is that essentially I sometimes think that we think that we're siloed, but in fact there's a huge amount of common ground. And the more that we can identify that common ground and move with a sort of shared sense of mission, the better. Communication is key to that. I know that we haven't completed the AVMS implementation across all the member states, but the more that we can all do to sit down together on occasions like this to talk about what we're doing and what is expected of us, and the better. And then I think there's a point to be made about playing to our strengths as well. So NGOs are really and experts are really critical in articulating what the risks are, the whys, the call to actions. Regulators are extremely well placed to set the standards, to tell us what's expected of us, and then tech companies are really good at trying to find innovative, platform-specific solutions that will mean that we get to where we need to get. But my point is that we're all holding different pieces of the same puzzle, so we have to be sitting around the table together to come up with the solutions. And of course, I've mentioned it before, but children should have to be critical to that conversation as well. And you talked about enforcement, and of course we have user reporting mechanisms, which mean that people can report things that they're unhappy about on our platform, and that they will we will communicate with them to tell them what the outcome of that report is. Equally, if your content has been moderated and you're not happy with that, we have an appeals process so that you can seek redress in that context as well. But a critical part of enforcement is also accountability and transparency. And recently you will have seen that we've announced plans to open a transparency centre. Please do go onto our website and look at what that tour would involve. But we really want to bring people in to tell them what we're doing and get them to scrutinise our current practices in relation to our algorithm, in relation to our data collection and processing and security processes, but also in relation to our content moderation. And at the moment, that's a US initiative, but, and of course it's virtual at the moment. So I hope that many people from across the globe will come and ask us really difficult, tricky questions, and that we will be able to work towards better answers together.
Thanks, Alexandra, also for having brought another little elephant, the algorithms, artificial intelligence, the machines, who controls the machines. So that's also a big issue. I know that machines also play an important role for the other platforms, and Marco, actually, Pancini from YouTube, mentioned the role of machines. So I will then jump over to you, Marco. You can turn your mic on. How is it with the cooperation and enforcement from the point of view of YouTube? Floor is yours.
On the cooperation, I would like to mention as a best practice the EU Code of Conduct on Hate Speech that we signed with the Commission 4 years ago. We went through different stages and also auditing of the result of the code, including the collaboration with NGOs that are a very important part of this exercise. This is, in our opinion, a best practice that can be taken in consideration, both in terms of the guidelines that is offering and in terms of the collaboration that we have put in place. Moving on the enforcement and the topic of the machine, we were we're one of the first companies to launch a transparency report, which is including all the relevant information on how we are dealing with the use of artificial intelligence to catch content that is against our policies. Here I really want to stress, I encourage everyone to go look at the transparency report, and I really want to stress that one important dimension for us in terms of enforcement is to measure how many views content that is against our policies or content that is harmful was watched by our users. And we are very clear in saying that for the worst of the worst, we really try to make sure that zero views are made of this content.
Thanks, Marco, also for being so telegraphic. So now I will head over to Ania Helseth from Facebook to hear about Facebook strategies with regard to cooperation and enforcement. Ania, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So in terms of cooperation, broadly speaking, we would just always caution that any kind of cooperation mechanism needs to reflect the nature of the service, and probably considering the nature of the services discussed today, the cooperation body pan-European is the best place to look at those issues. I would like to echo what Marco said around Code of Hate Speech being a very good practice example. We are also a signatory. This was an effort by some other companies as well. It is something that we're looking at as well when we prepare ourselves for AVMS full implementation. In terms of enforcement measures, the way we look at it today, of course, we have fully fleshed out reporting mechanisms that already were undergoing number of improvements to address variety of learnings that we had over years. To your point from the previous panel, we continue to work on those issues. This is never a finished journey. And in terms of providing our users with appeal, it's fairly simple at all. It's happening on our platform. We also recently launched a new kind of separate from Facebook appeal body called Oversight Board. And while it's not a, let's say, third instance of appeal, it will look at the very difficult cases that will address some of the most difficult questions that Facebook had to grapple with. All this enforcement mechanism and how the takedowns of content appear, on which ground, are also reflected in our transparency reports that we publish quarterly. So I also can encourage, in the interest of time, to at some point have a look at those. And yeah, remain open to any follow-up questions.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, so I understand that the biggest advice is to go on your websites and read all these transparency reports that are out there. I understand all of you have done this exercise. So before I open the chat box, very quickly to Lubos, have you read all of this? How long does it take? And what is your takeaway from all what is happening with regard to cooperation and enforcement? Have there been good scholars?
Thank you for the question. Of course, I'm trying to read everything. I can't say I did, but yes, we are taking this absolutely serious. I think what is important now is that this is excellent, first step, that the platforms are getting more transparent. But what we learned from also other exercises, for example, in this information area, is that we also need some kind of verification of the data that we are getting. So I think the next step should be to have a measures established and the frameworks established that we can actually verify what the platforms are saying. This is not because we are not believing in what they are they are saying to us, but of course, in order to have a real accountability, you need to have a verification mechanism that you can show not only to regulators but everybody else that this is the real state of things. So I think this is a way forward, but of course we appreciate absolutely that the platforms are getting more and more transparent.
Sounds good. And indeed, accountability is a key word here. Dispute resolutions were mentioned, and that is actually our first question here, coming from Andris Melakaus from the Latvian Ministry of Culture. A tricky one. I don't know if I know the answer myself. He asks, what will be the dispute resolution mechanism between EU member states and the UK in case of alleged violation by a UK-based video sharing platforms of the rules of the protection of minors? Any view on this? Spontaneous intervention. Otherwise, I maybe call Anna to address this one because I don't know what to say. Anna?
It is indeed a tricky question, and you know that there is little to be said at this stage because, issues of how the UK will be looking at the body of EU law once the future relationship will be defined are still very, very open. So you will understand that I will not be able to comment on that because I simply don't know, because we don't know what the future will bring in terms of the relationship between the UK and the EU for our very complicated and very intertwined legal relationships. So I think what is important, of course, we should not forget that the UK will continue to be bound also by other pieces of law, international law, and Maja knows this very well as well. And then on top of it, I think that what will be very important is also pragmatism, and I have high hopes in the fact that since the discussion around online harms and about the transposition of the AVMS are very aligned in the UK, I truly believe that we will be able to find solutions that work, in the interest of all the users and the players, in Europe, because I think on neither side there is an interest to create parallel universes, if you understand what I mean.
Absolutely, and it reassures me that I was not the only one who had no answer to this question. So there is another question here about influencers. Indeed, Article 28b of the directive also includes commercial communications, and the question is towards the panelists. Is there one of them who would like to volunteer about what they apply to influencers doing marketing on your platforms? Ania, Marco, Alexandra.
I'm happy to take this one to kick off on this one, Maja. So we provide, as Anna clarified in her presentation, we provide tools that offer the possibility for influencers, we call them creators, of course, to add to their content some promotional message. So in order to be transparent, the creators, when he's uploading a content on the platform, will be required to tick a box and say that there is a promotion in his content, or the creator will also be able to add his own message. But the key point is that our policies are very clear that this disclosure has to be done.
Sounds reassuring. I see Ania also would like to add something.
Yeah, very quickly. From our side, we also have very strict policy around commercial communications coming from those influencers. For example, on Instagram, any kind of cooperation that is for commercial purposes is disclosed usually under the under the name of the profile itself, so that users have understanding that, the post that they're seeing the video, but it can be a photo as well, or any type of content is actually for commercial purposes. The influencer is basically passing them some kind of advertisement indirectly.
Yeah, they are indeed close parents. So what's happening on TikTok? Do you have issue with influencers, Alexandra?
It seems like our positions are really well aligned. So yes, obviously creators on our platform are required under law to make sure that it's clear when they are receiving a payment, or that they're making, that their creative content also has a commercial element. So yes, the answer is yes.
Well, that's already good when there is an alignment between the policies. It makes things a bit easier and more homogeneous also for the users. In the chat box, we have now only some comments which are very interesting and which I invite you to go and read on the website. But time is a tyrant, so I am afraid we have to close it here. I would like to thank you all for having been so active and engaged in the discussion. And I would leave the honor of wrapping up and giving some concluding remarks to the Executive Director of the European Audiovisual Observatory, and I thank you all.
Thank you, Maja. And actually, now for the remaining minutes, some thought about what we can take away from this focus session. I have 3 key points. Firstly, the development of the audiovisual sector has a life of its own. I think that became quite clear. It does not necessarily move in parallel to the progress of the transposition progress. As we have heard, the industry adapts constantly to reality, and this includes not only development of new services, but also the development of solutions in order to meet existing, expected, or hoped for legal requirements. And you know what? I think we should expect no less from service providers, because they run businesses and must defend or strengthen their market position. Whether or not transposition deadlines are being kept is actually not that relevant. But what does this mean for the success of the transposition? Now, obviously, this depends on whether legislators and regulators envisage rules that are compatible with the new, meanwhile established reality. Or if you prefer the industry perspective, it depends on whether or not the industry anticipated correctly what the transposition would look like. And if I may add, I think there's another layer, and that is the harmony between the national solutions. There we have also different speed, and we heard that this might cause problems. This all brings me to my second point. If you have difficulties, you might want to reduce them to the absolute minimum. And this means you need to make people talk and be as transparent as possible about their goals and ideas. Whether or not this interaction between the parties concerned by the directive will work will become evident bit by bit as the transposition process moves on. Now, I hope that with this focus session, the observatory could stimulate a little bit this interaction. And I think this is a good moment to extend our thanks to the actors here on screen, the keynote speaker, and all the panelists. Thank you very much in the name of everybody, including, I think I can say, the presidency and also the audience that benefited from that. Now, you have noted our discussion was triangular between the Commission, the regulator, the industry players. But there are other industry players, there are the national legislators, and there are last but not least the consumers that must complement that discussion. Now, third and finally, please expect that the observatory will take its observing role and its overall mandate to help enhance transparency in the audiovisual sector very seriously. And I would like to invite you already to really look at our website where we follow the transposition process. You find a table there. You will see where the transposition stands country by country, and you will have a link also to the draft or hopefully soon, the past legislation that goes along with that. And you will find, once you're there on the internet, also much more information, also generally on pluralism and responsibility, which is the overarching topic of this German EU Council presidency. So please stay faithful to the German presidency events that still continue, and keep your appetite for information offered by us, because we will continue to do the job even when the German presidency ends. So thank you all. Guten Appetit. We are very close to lunch, but not yet there, because I will hand over and back to Berlin. Hello, Berlin. It's your turn.
And thank you very much from Berlin to Susanne Nikolchev and Maja Cappello from the European Audiovisual Observatory. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for moderating today's discussion. A huge thank you, of course, also to all the panel members and to those of you participating in this online conference series, virtually sending us your questions and your comments. So thank you. This concludes our fourth focus session in our conference series. For those of you who may not have been able to join us for the previous events, here's a quick overview of what we had so far. We began with the opening event back in July that provided an overview of all the different topics that we will be examining. That's being followed by these 5 focus sessions where we discuss the issues in more depth. Our very first focus session looked at EU media regulation and discussed how it can be better tailored to meet current and future challenges. Our second focus session examined whether Germany's federal media state treaty could possibly serve as a model or a blueprint for other EU countries. Our third focus session looked at how we can find a balance, on the one hand, between protecting freedom and fundamental values, and on the other hand, enforcing cross-border media regulations. And now, after today's focus session on the video sharing platforms, we have one more focus session that'll take place on October 1st, and which will be hosted by my broadcaster, DW, looking at the role of artificial intelligence on journalism. And finally, at the end of October, we will have a closing event in which we will summarize all the discussions and all the findings of the focus session with the aim of incorporating them into future work on EU level. So thank you everyone for participating in this online conference, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future events. Bye-bye.